Welcome, everybody, to Spirituality Adventures. Thanks for tuning in. We are talking about health and spirituality, and today we have a special guest with us, Amy Tibbitts. And Amy Tibbitts is the director of the Lilac Center, and I am so thankful that you are here today, Amy. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
I would like to start by just getting your story out a little bit, sort of like what's your background, where were you born? I mean, like a short summary of, your education, your career path, kind of let people know who you are and what your background is.
Sure. So I was born in Salina, Kansas, so not too far from here. And my childhood was kind of really super overwhelming and intense, actually. So I was in foster care and didn't graduate from foster care, but left foster care and went to college. So that was kind of my first experience in mental health as far as learning to give back to everything I'd already received. So graduated from K-State and then graduated from KU with my master's degree. And in social work, I always had just a big heart for helping. And anyways, so started the Lilac Center in 1999.
Okay.
And that's, it's been a wonderful tool to kind of open up and expand mental health services to people in our community. And it's kind of such a broad question. So it's hard to kind of break it down.
I was born in Wichita, Kansas, but my parents are still alive, had a great experience with them. Do you think your foster care experience influenced your career path? Was that something that motivated you?
When I was in foster care, they had a fantastic program, and there was a grant through K-State. So I was in foster care in Manhattan, Kansas, and this grant came out where they actually sent people to meet with kids that were in foster care and help them enroll in college. Okay. And so that was just a phenomenal experience to have somebody come to my foster home, walk through those steps, and get me kind of on the way to higher education.
Awesome. What did you major in at K-State?
Social work also.
Social work, okay.
And so actually my first job, so this was in 1991. I was working at Pizza Hut, loved Pizza Hut. It was great job. But then I was offered a job after I went to college and was being quite successful to do the same thing. So I met while I was in college with other kids that were in foster care and helped them enroll. And so that's was my experience of getting into social work.
Nice. And then you did your master's in social work as well?
Yes.
And then what other education did you receive? Did you do your, what do you do for your license in social work? Your clinical license in social work, is that another track?
No. So after you graduate with your master's degree, you do 2 years of clinical work under supervision. And I did that at Wyandotte Mental Health. Okay.
All right. So after Wyandotte, where did you work? And then what led you into establishing Lilac Center?
Well, it was actually my husband. He encouraged me to go into private practice and open up the Lilac Center. I had a love for dialectical behavioral therapy. This was really kind of early on when dialectical behavioral therapy was just coming out. And I got approached by an insurance company asking to develop an adherent program. And so that's what launched the Lilac Center, is that the insurance company thought that it would be a very effective treatment model. And so for the first 2 years, they researched, and we researched with Marsha Linehan's group. And the insurance company was phenomenal because they not only referred people into the program, but also had a database of people that would have met criteria but weren't referred. And so you could tell the difference between the effectiveness of the treatment.
Okay. So I had never heard of DBT therapy or dialectical behavioral therapy until I was in rehab 2 years ago, and I got exposed to some of the concepts there in rehab. I loved the way they framed up acceptance and change and those dialectical tensions and all that kind of stuff. So when I got back home from this rehab experience that I had, I started looking around Kansas City for DBT and found Lilac Center. So that's kind of how I got into it. But then I'm a reader. I study up on things. So like I ordered Marsha Linehan's book. Is that how you say her last name? Mm-hmm. And I thought it was fascinating. Like, she's still alive. She's the founder of this type of therapy, right? She's still alive. I'm sure you've probably met her.
Yeah,
you know her.
I have.
Tell us a little bit about meeting her, how you first discovered DBT, and maybe a little bit about her story as well, because I find that a little bit fascinating. How here's this person who's relatively new therapy, in the whole therapeutic world of ideas, and yet here she is, still her. So that's kind of fun.
So the first time that I got to experience Marsha Linehan was at a summit. So these big summit trainings go on, and they have all of these top people come and debate their theories. And so Marsha Linehan was debating Beck, and Beck developed cognitive therapy. And so it was fascinating to see these two icons on stage and them kind of debating back and forth the validity of their treatment. So dialectical behavioral therapy is different than cognitive therapy because it focuses more on behaviorally what someone can do to change, whereas cognitive focuses on changing automatic responses through your thoughts. And so I gravitate more to the behavioral therapy because I find it more difficult to change my thoughts. And we've all heard the phrase, if you would just change your attitude, you can change the way you feel, those type of things. But there's a reason why we have the beliefs that we have. And so to change those feels a little bit disingenuous. But to change the behavior and for it to work to change the behavior, it's just a miracle, actually, when you see people just having to do something different than to feel or think something different. So that was, many, many years ago, before I even launched the Lilac Center, so 97.
Okay.
And it's just, she would be somebody that you would see at these big conferences or trainings and different things. Her story really is she suffered from borderline personality disorder and was in the hospital for many, many weeks. I think it was 21 weeks of hospitalization. Maybe it was 21. I can't remember. I just read her memoir too. I can't remember the details. But she had some really profound spiritual experiences and educational experiences that changed her way of thinking. And she was able to get out of the rut that she was in. And then she went back and really tried to study what helped her through mindfulness and all of the other skills, and how to specifically help other people in that situation get out of those compulsions and addictive behaviors. And so she got a PhD, researched all of these different therapy tools that have been around forever and ever. And then she just packaged together the most essential ones, saying these are the difference between people who are doing well and those that aren't. And if you can follow these universal principles, you can be back on track with life too. So, anyways, she's...
So like before I went to rehab and then came out and was reading some of her materials on DBT, I had never even heard of BPD. So I thought I was pretty well versed on a lot of diagnoses, but like bipolar and all these things. As a pastor, you end up working with. I've worked with schizophrenics and bipolar, not clinically, but just as a support system, right? And so when I got into Marsha's material, and then I started reading about borderline personality disorder, did she develop her therapy specifically for that, or was it just a part of her experience, and so that's what came out of it? But it applies to all kinds of people.
No, the people that she studied were people that were chronically suicidal. And so that is a criteria for borderline personality disorder, but it ended up becoming a therapy for borderline personality disorder just because a lot of the criteria met what she was studying. However, it is a therapy that's proven to be effective kind of across the board. So borderline personality disorder, I just think of as a trauma response. And so if on one end of the continuum, you just have like generalized anxiety and like we all have right now with COVID, and you don't want to get sick, and you want to do the right thing, but you don't never know what the right thing is. And so you have kind of this general anxiety. And then, kind of farther down the continuum, you might have post-traumatic stress disorder, where you start having nightmares and intrusive thoughts. And then further down from that, you would have borderline personality disorder. And that's where it's a trauma response, and it's usually typical to people that have been traumatized before the age of 8 with some sort of pervasive trauma. And so if you kind of are constantly triggered into these reactivities of extreme emotion, and the people that you're around don't know why. And so that trauma response happens, and with seemingly huge emotions that come out of nowhere. And then kind of farther down from that would be DID, or dissociative identity disorder. So, yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting to me because I'm not bipolar, I'm not borderline, I'm not dissociative, but I kind of had a 2-3 year period of time where I had this meltdown. I've shared that publicly, dealt with insomnia, and then a few years of problematic drinking, coupled up with prescription Xanax. So all that ended up causing me to make a bunch of bad decisions, and it caused a crisis, like a 3/4 life crisis for me, I guess, instead of midlife. I was past midlife, but at any rate. And so in the midst of sort of that personal 3/4 life crises, I found so many things in DBT to be helpful for me. And so maybe we could just give a kind of an overview. Maybe you could give an overview of DBT principles. The thing that stuck out to me is that big general dialectic between change and acceptance and change. And so like in the 12-step world, everybody says the serenity prayer, right? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So I find it fascinating that DBT, like when you talk about these dialectical tensions in life, one of the big ones that frames up DBT is that tension between acceptance and change. Yeah. And give us a little bit more detail about DBT and kind of a brief overview of it, if you would.
So the dialectics is all about seeing that there's multiple truths that are happening at the same time. And you can create effective problem solving when you're able to see that there's multiple truths. So I don't have to be 100% right and someone else doesn't have to be 100% wrong, that there's truth in both sides. And so there's these dialectical dilemmas that happen constantly. And when a dilemma happens, it's when you get stuck in one of the two extremes. And the extremes are usually between rational thinking and emotional thinking. So they don't, you can really be kind of hot and reactive or cold and methodical. And so neither of those are actually good. So you want to be in the middle, which is what she calls wise mind. Mm-hmm. So you want to be able to move forward seamlessly without any anxiety or tension. And so these dialectical dilemmas that happen are between emotional vulnerability and self-invalidation. And then active passivity versus apparent competence, and unrelenting crisis versus an inhibited emotion. So essentially you do three things. If you're really highly emotional, you are very reactive, very impulsive, and it takes you a long time to calm down. And then if you're really extreme in your thinking, you oversimplify problem solving, you deny other people to share things with you, or you stop sharing personal experiences with others. And you punish yourself for having emotion. So when both of those things start happening over and over again, that's when people usually move to this very rigid point of view. And so those are the dilemmas that happen.
Yeah. So I find this fascinating. I think I'm one that grew up over-regulating my emotions, which Marsha even talks about how that's very common in Western cultures, individualized cultures, and it's good for goal setters. I'm very goal-oriented. So when it came to negative emotions, fear, anger, disgust, those kind of things, I just tried to suppress them and move forward, right?
Yeah.
But in this meltdown that I had, it's like I couldn't just keep suppressing things that I'd always been good at suppressing, right? I mean, I didn't.
Yeah.
People would have just thought I was super stable all the time. I probably was pretty most part all the time until I went through this meltdown. And so then all of a sudden, I've become more aware of how I really didn't listen to my negative emotions. I really didn't validate some of those feelings. And so suppressing them kind of didn't help me. So like now I've read a bunch of stuff on neuroscience, how our negative emotions are hardwired into the oldest part of our brain, fear, and, these fear and anger would be two huge ones, right? And so, like hearing somebody say the other day, like a guy that wrote a book called Permission to Feel, and he's trying to get emotional education into the public school systems, and how we grow up with rational minds, right?
Yeah.
With no real emotional education in our whole public school systems. And so he would say, we're not thinking people who have emotions. He says we're emotional people who think occasionally, which is an interesting way, and you're talking about this tension between rational mind, emotional mind, right?
Yeah.
And then there's wise mind. That's sort of the tension or balance. But what are the role of emotions in this therapy that you work with? I mean, how should people go about dealing with negative emotions in DBT?
Well, what's fascinating is, especially in the population I treat, is that they are super perceptive when it comes to picking up on other people's emotion. And so there's studies done with people that meet criteria for borderline personality disorder with a stack of like 100 different images. And so you would flip through the images and it moves from a neutral image of emotion to whatever the other emotion is going to be. Let's say anger. And in the study, over and over again, people that have suffered trauma are much quicker to pick up another person's emotional, inaccurately what they're feeling. So, but their perception of why they're feeling the way they are is usually completely wrong. And so if you
why they're feeling or the other person?
The other person's feeling.
So the perception of
the other person is incorrect.
Even though they picked up on it.
They picked up on it. Okay. So, if I was treating someone, they came into my office and let's say I was annoyed with something, which happens frequently, just from my office to the lobby and then coming back, I might see 10 or 15 things that I go, oh. But their perception is that I'm angry with them. And so, it's kind of a safety mechanism, like I've picked up on someone else's emotion, but then internalized it to somehow be about themselves.
Okay.
And then adverse to that, they're terrible at recognizing their own emotional experience. And so they don't recognize when they're having feelings. So part of the therapy, there's kind of two parts, is that you teach the emotion, and some of it is just memorization. So it's exposure with memorization. Like this particular event would cause anger normally in people. And people normally express anger by doing these things, cussing, yelling, slamming a door, those type of things, right? And the first 30 seconds to 2 minutes of an emotional response is completely innate to us. So my anger will be pretty consistent throughout my life for that first 30 seconds to 2 minutes. And so would yours. So if you're a door slammer, for instance, for that first 30 seconds, you might be tempted to get up and slam a door, right? Or cuss or whatever. For people with trauma histories, they've been punished for their expression. And so anything that is repeatedly punished will go away. So they stopped expressing their own emotional responses. They're over in tune to other people's emotional responses, internalizing more. And so that gets those really big emotional upheaval. And they didn't have any forewarning, didn't know where it was coming from. And so the first part is just exposure. Like we're going to expose you to small emotional experiences. And oftentimes I give the example of love and going to McDonald's, and their jingle is, I'm loving it. So if you got your order right and the fries were hot, you can have this emotion of love for McDonald's.
My friend Jim Waggy will appreciate that.
Right. And so you have these small experiences that happen, and then they can tolerate them more, the bigger experiences that start to happen in their life, whatever their emotion is. And so that first 30 seconds to 2 minutes, we really teach like that's exposure. And then we teach the second part is secondary emotions. So you want to talk about emotional experiences, communicate them. And Daniel Siegel, who's my favorite author, he says you got to name it to tame it. So if they can recognize their emotional experience, validate their own experience in the moment, then they can reduce the intensity of it.
Yeah, this research is just coming through loud and clear from, even brain science stuff, is that learning how to identify an emotion, name it, even feel it.
Yeah.
Right. So if I understand correctly, your primary emotions are basically all going to be hardwired into your body, or they're all going to be registering physically, correct?
Yeah. And then the second part is mentalization. Like a lot of people that have been traumatized or had pervasive trauma do not realize that you have thoughts that go with emotion. And so they view their thoughts as facts, and they're just emotional thoughts. So if I got angry and I had angry thoughts, instead of defining myself as an evil, bad person for having these thoughts, I would just know everybody has angry thoughts and no big deal. It doesn't define who I am. And so to talk to someone else about those internal experiences and then what they're thinking, and that's kind of the beauty of group, is that people talk about their thoughts and their experiences. And so it makes it less isolating to have such big emotional responses.
Yeah. So like shame, would shame be considered a core emotion in your world?
Yeah. So
I felt like overwhelmed with shame. Like because I went under the influence of Xanax and alcohol, I made some bad choices, right? And it cost me a lot. Okay. So the guilt thing was there. I mean, what I did, but it was, the deeper thing was a sense of shame. Like I'm a bad pastor now. I'm a bad, and it was really overwhelming. It felt like it was drowning me. And I'd dealt with shame, I think, my whole life as an emotion, but I never felt like I did in that first year or so out of this experience, where I felt like I was kind of like drowning in it. And then I feel shame about my shame, right? Like I feel embarrassed about being embarrassed. I feel shame about feeling shame. I feel, it's kind of this real trap that you can get your mind into. So I had people tell me, you've got to be in safe places where you talk about that stuff.
Yeah.
Get it out. So I was thinking about your group therapy context there and
how
important those things are for people. Yeah.
For shame is actually the only emotion that I can think of that you want to act opposite to it as soon as you recognize it. So if you've done something legitimately that has caused harm to others, you make amends. You make a commitment not to do it again, and you let it go. If you feeling shame, but it's from your past or something that's happened to you, you speak about it over and over and over again. You kind of stand up for yourself. So shame is one of those emotions that you teach opposite action to as soon as somebody recognizes it.
I was, Brene Brown writes a lot about shame, I think. Well, she says, I study shame for a living, which is funny, but she talks about like sort of this core of never good enough as being kind of one of those things that is an indicator of shame, right? You're when you're thinking about your own personhood, you're not good enough, or you're bad, whatever, either the flip side of those two things. Is that the core of it?
It is the core of it. And I think it's a fascinating emotion, though, because, I have a new puppy this year, like I'm sure a lot of people do. And I don't think that dog has ever felt shame. We're trying really hard to get it to feel a little bit of shame when he potties on the carpet. But
yeah, it's like, isn't that great?
To let it go and to step back into your position in life is what we're all called to do.
Yeah, that's good. We need to be more like the puppy dog.
We
right?
do.
That's good stuff. So I'm curious, in your book where you're talking about dialectics, you quote an author that helped me out a lot, Parker Palmer. And he kind of is a spiritual author. His background, I think, is Quaker. But this is a quote that came from your book that I really liked on this dialectical tension issue. And you said, you quoted him, contradiction, paradox, the tension of opposites. These have always been at the heart of my experience, and I think I am not alone. I'm tugged one way and then another. My beliefs and actions often seem at odds. My strengths are sometimes canceled by my weaknesses. Myself and the world around me seem more a study in dissonance than a harmony of the integrated whole.
Yeah.
I resonated with that statement and found it interesting that's a part of the whole therapeutic model that is DBT.
Yeah, the philosophy of dialectics is so fascinating. So it was actually developed in the 1700s by Hegel. And so Hegel was just phenomenal of how he was seeing these multiple truths, but people wanting there to be just one ultimate truth. And so everything else needed to be discounted. And so he was the first to say, why don't we all find some way or some path to move forward? And then after Hegel came Marx. And so Marx, we all know, for communism. Mm-hmm. And so, but really the philosophy was that we each have our own ultimate truth. And if we're allowed to develop this ultimate truth, we'll be able to fulfill a utopic society together. So if you're able to develop yours and I'm able to develop mine, we'll be able to live together in harmony. And so I think Marsha Linehan, she did not have that take on it. She had an internal take. So mm-hmm. between thoughts and emotion, there's an ultimate truth that is separate. And I remember when my son was just 4, he came to me and he said, Mommy, do you know your heart does 2 things? It beats blood to all of your body parts and it holds all of your love.
Oh.
And wow. I thought that was a beautiful way to explain dialectics, is that there's this really mechanical way that you can describe an experience, an intellectual way, but then there's an emotional way and we don't have language that even can bridge the gap between the two, but we know that both are essential for us to thrive. So it just honors in such a beautiful way both of those truths.
Very good. It's interesting. I've read a bit of Hegel and philosophy and that kind of thing. So I was working on a PhD in the Hebrew Bible, and the Hebrew mind is quite paradoxical. So when you read the Hebrew Bible, you can find passages that directly contradict each other. But you can see the truth in both of them. So it could be something like, how do we do we trust our emotions and our instincts and our intuition? And there's passages in the Hebrew Bible which would say, no, the heart's, deceitfully wicked. Jeremiah, he was a kind of a negative prophet. And I was just with a group of physicians who were dealing with in a therapy group, dealing with addiction issues, and all of them could identify with they don't want to trust their mind because they spent so many years making bad decisions under the influence of alcohol. On the flip side, there's same Bible would talk about delight yourself in the Lord, and He'll give you the desires of your heart. And it's this positive view of your instincts and your heart and your desires and all that kind of stuff. And so the tensions are there, even in these sacred scriptural texts. I find some people call it non-dualistic thinking if you're in the Buddhist world, and so then Hegel and some of these guys picked up on some of these tensions in the philosophical world. I find it fascinating. What about acceptance, radical acceptance? This phrase came up over and over again in the whole 12-step world. And maybe it ties into shame a little bit too, but that's one of the things I really loved about DBT was this emphasis on radical acceptance, and then some of the practices around that help you get to that place. Talk about that a bit.
Well, radical acceptance is about willingness to see the world as it is. And so not as you want it to be, but actually as it just truly is, without judging it, without requiring it to change at all. And so to see something and not require any change around it or put any judgment on it is difficult. It's very, very difficult. Like our mind just automatically wants us to judge a situation. In fact, it's to not judge a situation can bring true joy. It's the only time we can experience joy is to not have any thought of how it could change to be better. And so radical acceptance is even taking your past or things that you don't like or things you don't like about yourself or others and just seeing it as it is and being willing to accept it and make a life anyways. And so Marsha Linehan uses the example of like somebody going to prison for a crime they didn't commit, and it's went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they're going to be in prison. So what does this person do? And then she talks a lot about how to radically accept your life as it is. So even in the worst situations, you would have to have acceptance. I remember facilitating a group after I had children. And someone asked me, could you accept if something happened to one of your two children? And I really was like, no, there's just no way. But then after some meditation, a few deep breaths, is that I will accept whatever is. And so there's this freedom that comes with not that I would want anything to happen, and I'm going to do everything in my power that they're safe and well taken care of. But I don't get to decide the outcome of things. And so I can just put my best effort in, and whatever happens is many other factors are involved in that besides my own will.
So I think this is challenging for most people. Like you don't have to be borderline personality disorder to
Absolutely
deal
not,
with these things, right? This is what has attracted me to this therapy model, is that I'm looking at it and going like every human being deals with all of these issues that are built, that are in this therapy model. It's like, we're always wishing something was different, it seems like, or having trouble accepting something that is, or somebody else that we have no control over, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in the 12-step world, that's a huge deal. You got to give up control. You got to recognize what you can't control, right? And how you think about it and judge it and all these kind of things. You want it to be this and this and this and this, and then finally you talked about joy in hitting this place of, you call it radical acceptance, you could call it surrender, you could call it kind of letting go of your control, right? And then you can talk about that finding joy, and then what are some of the methodologies that you help people find that joy, find that place?
So, radical acceptance is one of those concepts that are extremely hard to teach because it can come in an instant, or someone can struggle for it throughout their whole life. So I think of situations that take control of my mind, and I perseverate over them over and over again. And I think, why did this person do this? Why did this person, and it's a trap. And then I can recognize my mind is so trapped by this. I wish I could just let it go. And then in a moment, it's gone. And so it's like a gift, but you can't even control when you get it. So I wish I could teach it. Like if you do A, B, and C, you can have radical acceptance over this. But the truth is, you have to do all of the distress tolerance skills to not make the situation worse while you're just waiting and praying that it's going to come at some moment in your life. And maybe a week passes, maybe a year passes, maybe a decade passes, and it hasn't come, but it will. So
give us a little example about, because I know two of the skill sets that you try to teach with acceptance are mindfulness and then distress tolerance.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Oh, sure. So mindfulness is all about observing the moment and just letting things be the way they are. And so you would observe it, and then you would describe it. So describing and observing would be two totally separate things. But your mind doesn't view them very separate. So you can observe something, and then immediately you want to describe it, either good or bad, or put some sort of label around it. So it's a period of time where you just set aside that you're not going to react to anything to. And then once you figure out what you want to do, you'll participate in a new way. And true participation in life creates no harm. So no harm to you, no harm to anybody else. Sometimes when I teach this, I think of a vegan lifestyle. Like if I was truly serious about participating in life, I would change the way I eat even, but I'm not going to do that. So it's participating in a new way that moves you forward in a way that's very comfortable, that you let go of all anger and vengeance and needing to be right, and you just do what's most effective, and you play by all of the rules, and you just do the next right thing is what they usually say in AA.
Mm-hmm. So mindfulness, and some of your exercises in your book, by the way, I've looked through both of the books and read quite a bit of them. Untangling You and Empowering You, are those the two?
You Untangled and You Empowered.
And You Empowered, okay. And so in a lot of the exercises that you give people to do, it involves breathing.
Yes.
Talk about that a little bit. Breathing as a way of achieving this mindfulness, and that's a part of the acceptance thing.
So with breathing, we always have that with us. And so we can focus our thoughts on our breath. So to practice mindfulness, to actually practice observing, you have to observe something. And the more you can throw your mind into what you're observing, the more the mind can synthesize information. And so the theory is actually called flow, on how the mind synthesizes things together. And so when you're not focused and your mind is really scattered and all over the place, the ideal thing is to focus. And so when you're focusing, you can focus on your breath, breathing in for a count of 5, holding it for a count of 2, and breathing out for a count of 7. You can do that over and over again until you feel settled. You can count backwards from 50 down to 0. On the inhale, you would just say 50. On the exhale, 49, and try to get all the way back to 0. And these are really great exercises if you find yourself in situations where you want to be really reactive or impulsive, or you're really anxious about something. It just calms you down and allows your mind to focus and do what needs to be done.
Excellent. I've struggled to practice some of the mindfulness techniques, but I've also had times when it really clicked. So I must have gotten into that flow thing, right? Where like I felt like I was relaxing and letting go. Use some images that helped me achieve that, as I would focus on breath and stuff like that. I don't know. That's a fascinating study for me, and some of those practices and how they affect our physiology, our brain, all those kind of things.
So really, Daniel Siegel says that there's 3 pathways that we can get to that place where we're calmer. And one is mindfulness, or practicing meditation. The other one is through exercise. And so when you go out and you ride your bike, that really helps people in their minds kind of gather together. And you can't be impulsive if you're in the middle of a sporting event. And the last one is true love, surprisingly. So if you're actually communicating and being loving in a situation, it can help your mind and emotions.
Awesome. That's good stuff. So the change part of this thing deals with skill sets with people skill sets, behavioral skill sets. It deals with your emotional regulation. So in the acceptance change model, the change set is really a whole set of skills that you teach, right?
Yeah. So with radical acceptance, it's taught that there's really four ways that we can all address a problem. So there's thousands and millions of different problems that each of us can have, but there's only four ways that we can address them. So the first one is to solve the problem. So if you're going to solve the problem, we usually teach interpersonal effectiveness skills, how to be assertive, how to talk, how to speak up for yourself, how to maintain your self-respect, how to maintain a good relationship with someone else. The second thing that you can do if you have a problem is regulate emotion. So you can actually change emotion when you want to change it. So if I got mad at one of my children, let's say, I can change my emotion, and I can do that pretty quickly. Like I can look at their hands and realize that they have little hands, and I don't need to be angry. They're going to learn and they're going to grow, and it's fine. So you can change emotion quite easily, and that's what the emotion regulation skills teach. The third thing that you can do is you can radically accept, and that's all of the distress tolerance skills. So you don't have to change the problem. You don't have to change your emotions around it. You don't have to like the problem. You can just see it as it is and be willing to make a life for yourself anyways. And the last thing that you can do is you can always stay miserable and make the situation worse. So a lot of people live in the last one. So this therapy is all about doing the first three.
Very good. So we're in this COVID time. People are feeling stressed out in unusual ways. And so I ran across this little guide that you gave for COVID-19 panic. And
yes.
Maybe speak to that a little bit, because people are listening right now. Maybe they're not in therapy. Maybe they're not struggling with borderline or some other type of diagnosis, but they're struggling with life. They're struggling with stress, with school, with their kids, with the uncertainties, with employment issues, masks, everything that goes on. Life isn't normal. It's just such a weird world we're living in right now. You called it the Twilight Zone, I think, in your book here.
So this COVID-19 panic book is using these same skills, but they're specific to what's going on right now and all of our heightened anxiety and the fear that goes around it. So a lot of people are really worked up emotionally. We've been getting a lot of new intakes into our center where people are struggling to manage their mental health around this time. So we're hopeful that people find this book extremely useful. I know I absolutely have and quote it all the time and love it. So I think it'll be an invaluable resource. And the skills in it aren't just for COVID. I mean, they're just good, healthy skills for people.
Right. They're life skills. So, we've been talking about, I think all of these things that we talked about are spiritual things. I really think at the core of spirituality is connection. With yourself, with people, with something greater than yourself that's loving and caring. And I noticed the word wholeness that is brought up in one of your books. And I thought about how do you view wholeness in your therapy model? I love that word, wholeness. We all need some of that, right?
I view it more as like congruency between what we think, feel, and do. And so I believe we achieve a feeling of wholeness when all of those are in line, that they're not fighting with one another, or when we're doing something that we don't really believe in, or all of our interactions with people seem to be conflictual. And so if we are in a place of wholeness, all of those things line up.
Congruence with what we think, feel, and do.
Yeah.
So there's a word in the Hebrew Bible, shalom. And it's a lot of times just used as a greeting, peace. But the heart of the word is this idea of wholeness, and where we're achieving some type of health in a lot of physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. That there's a sense of I think peace that is sort of invade, and you speak of contentment within this idea of, I think, of wholeness. Is that?
Yeah.
What do you think about contentment? What do you think about, and even I've heard you speak of gratitude as maybe outworkings of wholeness, I guess. If we're congruent with what we think, feel, and do, what does contentment look like? What is
feeling content
and gratitude?
Yeah.
How do those play into this?
Well, those are words kind of like radical acceptance. Like, you know it when you have it, and when you don't have it, you know it too. Mm-hmm. And so I think of, gratitude, and with tomorrow being Thanksgiving, it's just a wonderful time to think of what we have, and then how to achieve that awareness of those that are around us and our connection to those people. And so with COVID right now, I don't know about everyone else, but we're not having a family gathering, and we're not doing the same things that we did before. And how are we going to stay connected and grateful for one another? And I have a brother that's an ER nurse, and he was telling me things legitimately are really bad. Like, he works in an ER that has 8 beds and there's 10 patients there. So I have so much gratitude for him, and I don't want him over for Thanksgiving. So how do I share that love with him and be connected to him, right, and content with, it's going to be okay. Mm-hmm. We're all going to make it through this. And I think it's just staying present and going ahead and making those phone calls and reaching out or doing things like this. Mm-hmm. So I'm very grateful for you today for having me.
Well, I'm glad you're here. So we will be airing this episode in the new year.
Oh, okay.
But tomorrow, as we're talking, is Thanksgiving Day, as we're having this conversation. And this contentment and gratitude go hand in hand, I think.
Yeah.
I've read that in some brain science stuff that negative things stick to us like Velcro.
Yeah.
And positive things tend to slip away like Teflon. And so it's the way our brain's wired, like that old brain, fear, anger, hardwired so deeply, the negative, the fight, flight stuff. So what are some ways that we can practice gratitude every day, not just around the holidays, but every day of our life? And how do we cultivate that in such a way that it sticks, like these positive things stick to us? How do we do that?
Sure. I think that being gentle, interested in others, validating of other people and ourselves, and being easygoing. And if you can't do that all the time, totally fine, because nobody can. But if you can do it first thing in the morning, or the first time you're meeting someone at work, those little things that we do in our interactions that really only take 30 seconds to a minute, can change the course of how people are interacting with you and vice versa. And it can make that positive feeling of gratitude return.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here. Maybe as we close this out, maybe thinking of people who are listening right now, they're starting 2021 and they're going, gosh, is 2021 going to be any better than 2020? All that we've experienced, it just seems crazy, right? All of the world that we live in. But give us some closing thoughts here as we face 2021 and the outlook on this new year.
I think the outlook needs to be looking at the silver lining. Like, what are the things that changed? The ways that you slowed down, the ways that you reconnected with the people in your immediate circle over the last year, and how you can maintain that moving forward and not just kind of jump back into a crazy life or a crazy reactive situation. So at the beginning of 2020, I told my family and friends, it's going to be a year of amazing change. And boy, it has been. So they still tease me to this day going, we don't want you to say it's going to be a good year again. So I'm not going to say 2021 is going to be a good year, but I think we need to look at what was good about 2020 too.
That's good. Well, thank you so much for your work in the Kansas City area, and I'm sure it goes way beyond that, but thanks for your commitment to mental health and for starting a Lilac Center. As I've gotten to know it, I've met several people that are close friends who have been blessed by your work, and so we greatly appreciate what's happening. So you have two offices, one in North Kansas City, one in Overland Park, is that right? Or where's your
It's in Mission, Kansas.
Mission, okay.
Mm-hmm. And we're opening up a new location in Lee Summit.
So if somebody wants to reach out, what are the ways they can do that and connect with Lilac Center?
They would just call our main number. It's 816-221-0305. And if they push 1, they'll get help right away. It is an answering service when you push 1. And if you push any other number, you're going to get our back-end staff that will be directly available to you. So either way is completely wonderful, and we'd love helping.
What's your website?
LilacCenter.org.
Lilac Center, Lilac, LilacCenter.org. So, yes. Well, thank you so much for taking time to do this, Amy. And I want to just thank all of you who have tuned in with us today. And we appreciate you following Spirituality Adventures, and God bless you.
Harvey Media Production.